Welcome to the latest installment of Cooking for Moderately Lazy People. Today, we're going to be making Parmesan Crusted Meatballs. They're like little meatball Wellingtons with Parmesan cheese around the outside. Let's get started. We're going to start by combining the following ingredients in a small bowl. 1 cup of grated Parmesan cheese, 1 teaspoon of oregano, 1 teaspoon of garlic powder, 1/2 teaspoon of thyme, 1/2 teaspoon of sage, 1/2 teaspoon of basil, and 1 teaspoon of crushed red pepper. If you prefer this to be less spicy, or spicier, feel free to modify the amount of crushed red pepper. We'll then whisk this until combined and set aside. Next, we'll grab 6 tablespoons of butter and put it into a small bowl. It goes into the microwave for about 1 minute in order to get melted. I actually forgot to film this part, so you'll just have to take my word it was happening off screen. Once the butter is microwaved, it will get set aside to finish melting and cool to a temperature where it won't be scalding hot. We're then going to grab 1 can of crescent roll dough. You can just use a regular can of crescent rolls or the uncut sheets. It's going to be wrapped around meatballs, so I usually prefer the sheets, but it doesn't really matter which one you use. We're going to roll it out as flat as we can get it on a cutting board. I personally have never gotten the dough to unroll evenly, and there may be some gaps in it, but that's fine. Again, we're going to roll the dough around the meatballs. Once we have it unrolled, we're going to take a pizza cutter and cut the dough into 20 sections. You can do anywhere from 16 to 24, but I've found 20 to be the most efficient. We'll likely have some dough on the side, which is fine. We might need to patch up some of the meatballs, and if some of the meatballs have had time for the ice on them to melt, some of the dough may not stick very easily, so having extra dough available helps. Once we've cut the dough to our liking, we're going to pull out our bag of store-bought frozen beef meatballs. Now I know you must be thinking, what's the deal with this? This video is cooking for moderately lazy people, not warming up store-bought meatballs for moderately lazy people. With this recipe, though, we really need frozen meatballs. If we try to wrap the dough around fresh meatballs, we're likely going to wind up with squished meatballs. You could, if you wanted to, make your own meatballs, freeze them, and then use them for this recipe. Thing is, the bulk of the flavor is not coming from the meatballs with this, but the cheese and the herbs stuck to the bread. So for the sake of being moderately lazy, the use of pre-made meatballs is fine. At this point, let's go ahead and preheat the oven to 350 degrees. We're then going to take a meatball out of the bag and wrap one of the sections of dough around it. We'll roll it like we were making a fresh meatball, and then try to smooth out any gaps or cover any uncovered areas. We're going to repeat this process 20 times until we've used all the dough sections. If you have enough leftover dough, you can make more. You can also scale this down to use fewer meatballs. And while we're watching the thrilling footage of me covering meatballs and dough 20 times, let's talk cost. And here's the obligatory reminder that prices may vary depending on your area. A bag of frozen meatballs runs between $7 and $10 depending on brand. Let's assume the worst case here and go for $10. Crescent roll dough, whether you get the sheet or the pre-cut rolls, tends to be around $4. You can get the Parmesan cheese for around $3 for the store brand or $5 for the name brand. Again, let's go with the worst case scenario and say $5. That being said, we're only using 1 cup of it, so let's say $2 for the cheese to avoid doing any math with decimals. The herbs and the cooking spray we're about to use are effectively negligible cost. So we're looking at about $16 for 20 meatballs, or less than $1 per meatball. It's not the cheapest thing, but it does feed a lot of people, and this really isn't as good for a meal as it is for a party snack. And as I said earlier, this can scale down to family size, effectively cutting the price down. You would waste some dough doing this, but that would be unavoidable if you wanted to make fewer meatballs. To scale this down to 12, you'd effectively cut the meatball cost per meal and the cheese almost in half, making the whole thing clock in at under $10. Of course, you could just use the leftover dough for, I don't know, crescent rolls maybe? But I mean, what's the fun in using them for what they're intended? Once we have all the meatballs that we are going to use breaded, we're going to take 2 9x13 baking dishes and spray the bottom of them with cooking spray. We're going to use 2 baking dishes because we're going to want to give the meatballs plenty of space for the dough to expand, so it doesn't expand into other dough. If the bread puffs into itself, you wind up with a gooey, undercooked, doughy mess. We're then going to grab the cheese and herb mixture from earlier, along with the butter that I totally forgot to film up until this exact moment. We're then going to roll each meatball in the butter, and then in the herb and cheese mixture, trying to get it as evenly and thoroughly coated as possible. We're then going to put it in the baking dish with plenty of space in between it and its neighboring meatballs. We're going to repeat this process until we've coated all of the meatballs and placed all of them in the 2 baking dishes. They'll then go in the oven for 30 minutes, when we'll then pull them out and plate them for serving. And there you have it, Parmesan Crusted Meatballs. As always, the recipe will be listed in the description, along with a link to my spicy red dipping sauce short, because it pairs really well with these meatballs. If you like the recipe, or the video, or you just want to give me a stern talking to about using pre-made frozen meatballs in a cooking video, please feel free to like, subscribe, comment on, or share the video. Also, feel free to click the notification bell for updates on my newest content. Thanks for watching, and bon appetit!